Welcome to 15 Minutes of Feminism, part of the On the Issues with Michele Goodwin at Ms. Magazine platform. As you know, we report, rebel, and we tell it just like it is. And on 15 Minutes of Feminism, we dive right in. We count the minutes in our own feminist terms. And in this episode, we're talking about menopause. It's going to affect most women during their lifetimes, but until fairly recently, it's a topic that's been a bit outside of the mainstream, a bit taboo, kept in the shadows, where we are shining a light on it right here and now. We know it's going to affect populations across ethnic and racial groups, people who are queer, trans folks, people who are incarcerated, and so much more. And I couldn't be more thrilled than to break all of this down with Omisade Burney-Scott, who's the creator of The Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause. And she's one of those advocates who tells it like it is and gives so much love and care to informing us all about what we should know about menopause and doing so with an intersectional view and lens. So, listeners, sit back and take a very close listen. On our 15 minutes of feminism platform, we dive right in, and I couldn't be more thrilled than to be spending time with you, Amishade. And I want to start off with unpacking an area of reproductive health, rights, and justice that tends to get ignored generally, and particularly when we're looking at certain communities in the United States, and that is menopause. So much attention is paid to matters of abortion, but matters that affect so many lives, that as menopause gets overlooked. And I want to start off with just asking you a high level question, which is why is that?
I think that's a really good question. We tend to compartmentalize reproductive health and reproductive justice in our country. So if we're only talking about access to reproductive health care, then we're talking about abortion access, protecting those rights, and that's very important. And then we move a little bit to another box and we start talking about maternal mortality rates and how we need to disrupt that and educate people about that. That's important too. But then there's like this barrier, a wall, confusion, opaqueness to reproductive aging and menopause. And I'm not sure why that is outside of some of the things that we know, generally speaking, around health equity. We don't value aging reproductive bodies in this country. We don't value or are curious about the needs, the experiences of reproductive aging and menopause in marginalized communities or marginalized identities. So I think that the opportunity or the call that we are being asked to answer from inside of the reproductive justice movement space is to create a spectrum that is continuous and has a very, very strong through line from monarchy to menopause. So instead of compartmentalizing it, it is iterative, it is fluid, it continues to expand on the becoming of your humanity as a person who was born with a uterus and ovaries.
I appreciate that framing. It brings to mind certain cultural, social backdrops that we can't ignore in the United States. Look, 50 years ago, a woman who was in her 40s was likely a grandmother. Society expected her, if she was living the good life, she had a new refrigerator. The good life meant she maybe had a dishwasher. Advertisements to her ranged from smoking a cigarette to then her washing machine, uh, her refrigerator, her stove, her oven, and making sure that her husband was satisfied and that her children were well fed. And that's living the high life. And if we pull back, I mean, and even in that cultural moment, we're looking at women basically being shut out of higher education, at least co-ed higher education, right? It's not happening there. We don't have a Title VII then, or we do 50 years ago, but just before that, we don't have a Title VII. We don't have a Title IX,
That's
any of
right.
that. And so I'm wondering if you'd pick up on this thread about how women today are demanding different things. A woman today in her 40s and her 50s is a very different woman in many ways than looking at, like, let's say the 1950s and 60s.
I think you bring up a really important point for me as someone who's a Gen Xer. So I was born in 1967. My younger sister was born in 1968. And literally, we have a family that ranged from my parents, who were part of the Great Generation or the Silent Generation. They were born during the Great Depression in Jim Crow South in Eastern North Carolina. So what looked like success and safety for them was very, very particular. And then I have older siblings who are boomers than my sister and I. We were supposed to be the first generation that didn't have to worry about all those things, right? We came online literally, figuratively, physically, right after Civil Rights Movement, Voting Rights Act, Title VII, Title IX grew up with us, right? So we were supposed to be this generation. You can go to school where you want to go to school. You can work where you want to work. You can have a credit card. You can own property. You can marry who you want to marry, and then you will be safe and happy, and you will die in your bed with your children around you, right? And it has been a very complicated, fraught journey of being the first of many Black children in integrated spaces, of being the first Black woman in many integrated spaces, and being told with no uncertain terms, you shouldn't be here. I don't think you're intelligent enough to be here. I don't think that you have a right to be here. I think you're taking a space from someone else. And I have also an idea of how you should show up in spaces. So when you don't show up in a space legible to me, then I want to make you different. I want to actually elevate you to an odd pedestal of a spectacular Negro who's like, oh, but you're different. You're so smart and you're so articulate and all these things. And I feel like the experience that I've had with my Gen X compatriots, as well as the millennials who I'm in relationship with and have given birth to, because I have a millennial and a Gen Z, is that we have decided that the blueprint that we were offered might not be accurate. That the blueprint that we have been offered is actually a practice and not something that is etched in stone. And when you are engaged in a practice, you have to keep learning. You cannot rest on what you did previously because that might not be the appropriate approach for the current context.
So then I want to hear from you about then what that older context was in terms of menopause,
Sure.
and then what that context looks like today in terms of encountering, because you've just dropped so many pearls of wisdom, right? It's the Southern piece, it's the life that was supposed to be different. And in many ways, the life that is different, except there's been blowback about that life that was different, right? There
Mhm.
was the expectation that it would be a life you work hard, there's going to be this life that is different. And with that life that is different, there isn't going to be the incessant pushback. So you cross the line, but on the other side of it is a bat that's looking to whack you at every 3 paces that you
Yes.
take forward. But that said, it turns out that menopause took place 60 years ago, 70 years ago, and menopause is still happening today. How do we understand? So, how do we understand those two differences? I mean, physiologically,
Mhm.
a lot of it is the same, but we're in different circumstances. Unpack all of that because there's a whole lot of complexity there.
Michelle, I think you've lifted up a couple things that we have been diving deep into over the last 7 years of this work with the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause. First thing, menopause is not a new thing. So let's just alleviate any of that. The cultural zeitgeist right now feels like everybody's talking about menopause. Why are we all of a sudden all talking about menopause? Well, we have different technology to understand each other now. We have different ways of understanding systems, context, patriarchy. We understand the difference between critiquing a system from within and disrupting a system. So I think that we have grown and evolved in a way. I think about my mom as a nurse who really prepared my younger sister and I for our first periods. She was alive when I gave birth to my first son, so she was very instrumental in that preparation, but she passed away when I was 31. So I did not have the benefit or the opportunity to do a deeper dive with her around going through the change. But I'm grateful for memory because I do remember observing, listening, ear hustling, as I like to put it, observing my
You know
mother.
it's ear hustling. you've grown up in a black household, you're a black
Listen,
grandma. It's all ear hustle because
it's
you
all.
know you're supposed to be silent.
That's
Just
exactly right. And then
to
they would figure
listen.
out you were there and be like, get out of the kitchen. Oh, sorry. I just wanted some water. But my recollection of my mother's generational footprint was that there was a lot of transformation happening. Divorce was happening in her late 40s, early 50s with her friends. Hot flashes were happening. We were not allowed to touch the thermostat. I remember that very distinctly. Not in my mother's house, not in my auntie's house. Do not touch the thermostat. My aunt had a ubiquitous hand towel that rested on her shoulder. So if she kind of had a hot flash, she
Stop
would
it.
just like, yeah.
Stop it, Omisade.
This was all recollection. This was not because she looked at me and said, "You know, I'm going through the change, right?" But we
That's
knew
right.
that's what it was. What I don't think I have access to, which I am very curious about, and this kind of like takes me into this kind of critical fabulation of like, what did my grandmother, great grandmother, and great great grandmother do? I think there was ritual that we don't have access to currently that they did. I think there was a role that midwives played with postpartum women who may have had babies well into their 40s that we have been separated from. And so there's a reunification that I think is happening now, that's important and it's complicated. I think there's a landscape and I think there's an ecosystem. I think that the landscape right now still very much focuses on a white, cis hetero, middle class reproductive aging menopause experience, which then creates outliers to that. Black women, indigenous women, queer folk, trans people, intersex people, people who are neurodivergent and differently able, people who are incarcerated are not being included in this current conversation. So if I'm going to be a student of history, our history in this country, if I'm going to be a good movement person, I'm going to pull that in and say, okay,
Mhm.
listen, let's disrupt that.
So, two thoughts come to mind. One, in thinking about that history, is the loss of what is an indigenous knowledge or a non-pharmaceutical knowledge.
Exactly.
The knowledge of what you steep, what you take off of a bark, what you do in terms of helping to heal and nurture the body. So
Mhm.
that loss. And then something else that comes to mind is the disregard for the concerns and pain anyway
Mhm.
of women generally, and then certainly women of color in those generations that we're talking about. And that actually makes me feel quite sad,
Mhm.
really sad reflecting on that. The put up or shut up,
Yeah,
grit your teeth and bear it. That was part of the legacy, sadly, of our country towards so many communities of women. Just, I mean, we can't separate thinking about 60, 70 years ago, and we will go forward to looking at what you're doing now. But I think we can't separate that from other aspects within society and law. During those periods of time, marital rape was legal. So all
exactly.
across the country, you could beat you domestic violence was permissible. Police would show up at the house and then walk the husband to a bar so he could drink some more and
And then let him come home and then let him
yes.
return. Yes,
Exactly. So you have domestic violence, you have marital rape, women being excluded from juries, being excluded from opening checking accounts in their own name, credit cards in their own names, being excluded or treated to hostile circumstances at co-ed colleges. And so all of that is this milieu of women working through what is happening physiologically with their bodies. And that
absolutely.
is really quite sad. Today, as we speed forward, and my goodness, this is 15 minutes of feminism, but we always say to our guests, we count the minutes in our own feminist terms. So, so now we're on the feminist terms clock, and I want to hear about what's taking shape today. What is the work that you are doing now to address these kinds of intersections that we've been talking about?
I love what is taking shape today. I think that we are troubling the narrative in a very delicious, organic way. And I'm also looking forward to us continuing to trouble the narrative in a way that is informed by history, that is informed by the social political climate that we currently exist in. not the one we want to live in, because we do get to create alternatives to this world, right? But we are living currently in a situation that is fraught, fraught with violence, fraught with medical misconduct. I just heard about these 600 women who are suing this hospital because they received non-consensual hysterectomies. I was not aware that this had happened, and it just came across my timeline. And I remember reading about Fannie Lou Hamer and how she was politicized because she had received a Mississippi appendectomy. So there are some things that have changed, and there's some things that have stayed the same, but the technology and the approach has changed. So where we are now, we're talking about it boldly in public to many people. We came online in 2019, and at that time, I felt like the landscape was primarily physicians, researchers who were like, we need to understand this better. But it wasn't coming from a cultural perspective, and it wasn't certainly coming from a feminist or a social justice perspective. So there was still a very narrow view of what menopause was being discussed publicly, how people were bringing people together to have these conversations. And then it became very popular. You know, we see a lot of people with star power, influence, affluence talking about their menopause journey, and then the trajectory to being a healthcare advisor or to starting a femtech company. That trajectory kind of took off, and then paywalls started popping up, right? And so you're like, you can get this information about menopause for just a small, small fee of $13 a month. So how do we not do that? How do we make sure that the information that everyone needs, whether you identify as a woman or you were assigned female at birth and you don't identify as a woman, how do you get access to accurate information for your journey? That's the first thing. The second thing is, how do you learn how to advocate for yourself? Because you're right. We held certain positions in our communities in high regard. Teachers, principals, pastors, doctors. We didn't question those folks. If the doctor said, you're going to do this, you say, well, that's what the doctor said, and so that's what I'm going to do. Now we're in a position where we can say, listen, this is what I need you to understand about myself. I'm the expert of this body. I had a period for 37 years. What did that make me? The expert of my period. So let's talk about what I've experienced and what I'm experiencing now. And how can you be Team Omi to make sure that I'm getting the care that I receive? So we are learning that as well. And then we're also learning about these amazing organic maroon communities that exist at the margins of the current landscape. Queer maroon communities where people who have been able to access gender affirming care and did not know that that was going to take them into medical menopause and did not know what to do. So we are working with these communities, partnering with these communities, listening to these communities, creating pathways for the communities to talk to each other, to share their narrative, to shift the narrative, and to shift the culture of our understanding of what this means inside of a Black, brown, indigenous, queer, poor, whatever body. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And part of what's being reflected in what you're doing is that there are more massive women, that some of the civil rights work that our foremothers fought so hard for in Mississippi, in Alabama, in North Carolina, in South Carolina, that got us a civil rights movement, a 1964 Civil Rights Act, a 1965 Voting Rights Act, thinking of Fannie Lou Hamer. And it truly has transformed, even though there's been the bat on the other side of the door far too often. The reality is that folks are daring to cross those lines,
Yes.
daring to say, I'm here. And now that I'm here, I want to be able to stay here and not become uh, overwhelmed, overburdened by
Hmm.
what is physiologically taking place in the body. And that is actually beautiful to see
Hmm.
that menopause is one measure,
Hmm.
in many ways, if you think about it, of the benefits of a civil rights movement
Hmm.
because it means so many folks, so many women, so many non-binary folks, so many people, as you were mentioning, who were assigned as women at birth and may not be now, but their civil rights are in play. And that means that they are in the workforce.
That's
That
right.
means that they have been educated. That means they're educating other people and they don't have time to waste. They want to get this, get answers and get things done, and they're demanding it. And that is really beautiful to see. All right. So even with our feminist time clock, I think that our time is coming up, but I cannot let you go before asking a question that we pose to
Mm.
guests who come on our show. And that is, what do you see as a silver lining going forward? And especially as we think about revolutionizing how we address menopause.
I think the silver lining for me is I grew up in the generation of the remix, right? I'm a hip hop baby, right? And my generation is the generation that took jazz, took R&B, and said, yo, I really love this. I don't want to degrade this. I want it to, however, be something different, potent in a different way. So I think that there's a remix that we are offering to the community. There's a way in which realities of menopause, it's important to understand, but the remix offers it in a different way. The remix offers context. The remix doesn't erase history. The remix remembers justice. The remix is focused on liberation. Hip hop, in and of itself, is a liberatory practice. So I think that the remix that I learned from hip hop growing up is the same thing that I bring to this space as someone who's done movement work for 31 years. And also as a hip hop head, we are remixing this. We are not pathologizing this. We are not disregarding the realities, but the remix is powerful, and we're excited to be a part of that.
Oh, you've got me thinking now on a spectrum from the blues to hip hop.
Come
So
on.
come on. It has been such a joy and pleasure to spend this time with you, Omisade. Thank you so much for your brilliant work. It's inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Guests and listeners, that's it for today's episode of On the Issues with Michele Goodwin at Ms. Magazine. I want to thank each of you for tuning in for the full story and engaging with us. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode where you know we'll be reporting, rebelling, and telling it just like it is. For more information about what we discussed today, head to msmagazine.com and be sure to subscribe. And if you believe, as we do, that women's voices matter, that equality for all persons cannot be delayed, and that rebuilding America and being unbought and unbossed and reclaiming our time are important, then be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to On the Issues with Michele Goodwin at Ms. Magazine in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever it is that you receive your podcast. We are ad-free and reader-supported. Help us reach new listeners by bringing this hard-hitting content in which you've come to expect and rely upon by subscribing. Let us know what you think about our show, and please support independent feminist media. Look for us at msmagazine.com for new content and special episode updates. And if you want to reach us, please do so. Email us at ontheissues@msmagazine.com. We do read our mail. This has been your host, Michele Goodwin, reporting, rebelling, and telling it just like it is. On the Issues with Michele Goodwin is a Ms. Magazine joint production. Michele Goodwin and Kathy Spiller are our executive producers. Our producers for this episode are Roxy Zoll, Oliver Hogg, and also Allison Whelan. Our social media content producer is Sophia Panagrahi. The creative vision behind our work includes art and design by Brandy Phipps, editing by Natalie Holland, and music by Chris J. Lee.